The administrative logs of a combine harvest vessel were not designed to be read by the cargo. The logs were formatted for departmental review, quarterly audits, compliance reconciliations, manifest verification, and the possibility that a harvested specimen might access them occupied the same conceptual space as the possibility that a shipping crate might file a grievance. The interface lacked locks, because the question of who might read it had only ever had one answer. Hattori had been reading it for 3 days. He sat in the maintenance alcove adjacent to the bridge, the same alcove he had occupied during his first hours aboard, when he had mapped the patrol routes by listening to footfalls through the wall. The alcove had become his. He had simply been there every time someone looked, and eventually the space had organized itself around him, a terminal angled toward the wall, so the screen could not be read from the corridor, a nutrient slab half-eaten on the ledge beside his knee, a series of marks scratched into the wall composite with a piece of broken drone casing. The marks were his notes. He could not read the combine script on the terminal. The modern woman had given him access, and the Romani woman had translated the navigation labels, but neither of them had time to sit beside him for hours while he worked through administrative submenus. So he had built his own system. Each combine character that recurred in the logs got a scratch mark. Each scratch mark got a position relative to the others. Over 3 days, the positions had become a map of the institution that had built the ship. Every institution that has existed for more than a generation develops competing loyalties, he thought, tracing a scratch line with the tip of one finger. The natural accumulation of distinct interests over time guarantees it. The combine has been operating for 10,000 years. I would be more surprised if it did not have fractures. It has seen this before. Never at this scale. Nothing in the Sengoku period had operated at this scale, but the architecture was the same. 2 families sharing a castle. 2 lords reporting to different superiors. 2 sets of retainers whose loyalties ran through different channels, crossed at the top and diverged everywhere else. The Takeda and the Yamaga had shared a border for generations, and the border had not been a line on a map. It had been a gap in the chain of command, a place where orders from one lord did not reach the retainers of the other. That gap was where wars started. The combine's gap was cleaner than anything he had seen on Earth. It was structural, intentional, perhaps, in the way that all bureaucratic redundancies were intentional, built to prevent any single chain of authority from accumulating enough power to challenge the whole. 2 parallel reporting structures on every harvest ship, 2 ledgers, 2 chains of command that shared a hull but not a language, and neither chain knew what the other had written. He had found the discrepancy on the 2nd day. The modern woman's access to the engineering systems had opened the ship's internal communication logs, not the content of messages, which were encrypted, but the metadata, who sent what, to whom, when, through which chain, and what departmental classification it carried. The metadata was formatted as a table. Tables were universal. Hattori could not read the words, but he could read the structure. 2 messages, sent within 3 hours of each other, on the day the bridge had been taken. The first was from the captain's station. He carried the freight command classification header. Hattori had identified this symbol by its position in 17 other logged communications, all of them mundane supply requisitions and course confirmations. The message had been addressed to a destination labeled with a symbol that recurred in every freight-related log, the magistrate's chain. It was the captain's recovery request, the one he had fielded and received no response to. It was still logged as open, unresolved, active. The second was from a different station. It carried a different classification header, one that appeared nowhere in the freight logs. Hattori had cross-referenced it against the full communication archive and found it in exactly one other context: the slaver's reports, the slaver's chain. The message had been sent 42 minutes before the bridge was taken, and it had been addressed to the same regional routing node, but through a parallel channel. Its status was marked with a symbol Hattori had never seen in the freight logs at all. 2 official records, 2 chains, 1 ship. The captain's log said, the ship requires recovery. The slaver's log said, the recovery team has been redirected. Neither chain had reconciled with the other. And in the Combine's administrative culture, in any administrative culture Hattori had ever seen, an unreconciled discrepancy was a door. He sat back against the wall and looked at the scratches. The map was clear enough now. He had been building it for 3 days, and 3 days was enough. He closed his eyes and held the entire structure in his mind. 2 parallel lines, connected at the very top, diverging everywhere else, running through every ship, every station, every decision the Combine made. The strength of the Combine was its scale. 10,000 years of harvesting, extracting, processing, filing. The machine was enormous and its weight was crushing. Its weakness was that the machine had 2 engines and they were unsynchronized. He opened his eyes, picked up the half-eaten nutrient slab, broke off a corner, chewed it, and set it down again. The food had improved since the modern woman had reprogrammed the synthesis matrix, but it was still fuel rather than sustenance. He understood the distinction now in a way he had not understood it in the Sengoku period. In the Sengoku period, he had never gone hungry long enough to forget the difference between eating to live and living to eat. Here, the difference was the entire distance between surviving and having a home. He stood up, brushed his hands on the Combine utility garment he wore, walked to the bridge. The Roman was already there. He was always already there. Hattori had observed this with growing respect over the past 4 days. The Roman did not sleep on the bridge. He maintained the same disciplined watch rotation he had imposed on everyone else, but he was always present when a decision needed to be made, as though the ship's rhythms had organized themselves around his internal clock. He stood at the central station with his arms folded, watching the navigation display cycle through its slow stellar parallax, and he turned when Hattori entered with the unhurried precision of a man who had heard the footsteps 30 seconds ago and already identified them. They regarded each other. The Roman said something in his clipped language, a greeting or an acknowledgement or both. Hattori inclined his head. The language barrier between them had become a familiar architecture. They could not speak to each other without the Romani woman's mediation, and yet they had developed a working communication that operated beneath and around language, gesture, timing, the deliberate yielding of a doorway, the strategic placement of a glance. The Roman understood authority as a structural principle rather than a personal attribute. Hattori understood the same thing from a different angle. They had arrived at a shared grammar, if not a shared vocabulary. Hattori touched his own chest, pointed at the navigation display, held up his hand. Wait. The Roman nodded once. Hattori left the bridge and went to find the Romani woman. She was in the medbay, the space that had been a processing station, and was now, through the Romani woman's stubborn occupation, a place where injuries were treated. The man with the electrical burns was there, sleeping on a pallet the Romani woman had constructed from cargo padding. His burns were healing, poorly, but healing. The Romani woman looked up when Hattori entered. She had a quality he had observed in the best interpreters he had known in the Sengoku period, a simultaneous attention to what was being said and what was being meant. She read his face before he spoke. Meeting, Hattori said. The word was one of the Combine terms the Romani woman had taught them all, a neutral administrative term that meant something like scheduled gathering for information exchange. In the Combine's vocabulary, it had the emotional weight of a furniture requisition. The Romani woman had repurposed it. When? She asked. He held up one hand, fingers spread, then closed them and opened them again. 10 minutes, enough time to find the others. I will bring them, she said. He inclined his head. Hattori, she said his name carefully, the way she said everything, tasting the shape of it, placing it correctly in her understanding. You are calling this meeting not the Roman? It was a reading, not a question. Intelligence, he said, another Combine word. The Romani woman had identified it in the ship's administrative vocabulary and recognized its cognate function, information gathered for strategic purpose. That it existed in the Combine's language at all told Hattori something about the Combine. That the Romani woman had found it and taught it to him told him something about her. She nodded. A quick, warm calculation passed across her features, the code switch he had observed in her between her guarded external face and her perceptive interior. I understand. The Roman will allow it? Hattori allowed himself a thin smile. The Roman understands domains. The Romani woman's eyes glinted. She understood him perfectly. She left. They assembled on the bridge within 12 minutes. The Roman at the central station, arms still folded, but his weight shifted slightly, the posture of a commander who has yielded the floor without yielding command. The modern woman at the engineering console, her eyes already moving between her terminal and the navigation display, cataloging what was different and what was the same. The tracker at the far edge of the bridge, seated on the deck with one leg drawn up, positioned where she could see both the display and the corridor behind them. The Romani woman standing between Hattori and the others, occupying the translation space, the conceptual middle ground through which his words would pass. Hattori stood at the navigation display. The display was cycling through its standard stellar map, the same slow rotation of cataloged systems, trade routes, and threat designations that the modern woman had been studying for days. Hattori reached out and touched the controls. The modern woman had shown him the interface on the second day. The display language was beyond him, but the spatial logic was not. Drag to position, expand to zoom, touch to mark. He cleared the star map. The display went dark. Then Hattori began to draw 2 vertical lines, parallel, running from the bottom of the display to the top, with a precise gap between them. He drew them slowly, deliberately, using the navigation display's annotation function the way a commander might use a sand table. The lines glowed amber against the dark field. At the top of both lines, he drew a single horizontal connection, one bridge, one point of contact. Below that bridge, nothing. The 2 lines ran parallel and untouching all the way down. On the left line, he drew 3 nodes, small circles, evenly spaced. On the right line, 3 more. The nodes on the left were connected by the left line. The nodes on the right were connected by the right line. No cross connections, no lateral links. The diagram was simple, it was also unmistakable. 2 chains of command, connected at the top, separate everywhere else. He let the bridge look at it for a moment. The modern woman leaned forward in her chair. The tracker's eyes moved over the diagram with the same slow scanning attention she gave to terrain. The Roman looked at it and said nothing, but the fold of his arm shifted, a tightening, the way a man might grip a weapon he already knew the weight of. Hattori touched the left line, pointed to the corridor that led toward the captain's station. He spoke one word in the Combine administrative vocabulary, freight. The Romani woman translated the word, the gesture, the context, the implication. Her voice carried Hattori's meaning with precision and without distortion. Freight command, the captain's chain. She pointed to the left line. This is his reporting structure. Captain to freight, magistrate to regional freight authority. Hattori touched the right line, pointing to the corridor that led toward the processing level, the slaver's domain. They spoke another word, court, the slaver court. A different chain entirely, slaver to court assessor, to the court proper. The Romani woman paused. They share a ship, they do not share a ledger. The diagram hung in the air between them, glowing amber, simple as a bone. Hattori touched the gap between the 2 lines, the fracture, and he spoke through the Romani woman with the unhurried precision of a man who had been building this sentence for 3 days. The slaver's redirect was logged to a different chain than the recovery team order, 2 official records that contradict each other. Neither chain knows about the other's entry. This is a door. Open. Silence on the bridge. Everyone in the room arrived at the same understanding simultaneously. The modern woman broke it. She was already working. Hattori could see her mind operating behind her eyes, fast and parallel, and relentlessly systematic. "Show me the logs," she said. Hattori had prepared for this. He touched the display and pulled up the two communication records, the captain's unresolved recovery request and the slaver's redirect, side by side, their metadata visible. The classification headers were different. The routing channels were different. The timestamps showed 3 hours apart. The modern woman read them. Her lips moved, processing, not speaking. "The magistrate thinks the ship is still missing," she said. "The court thinks the recovery team was redirected for operational reasons. Neither one has talked to the other." He slowly nodded once. For 4 days, the modern woman continued, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had worked in organizational systems and recognized this failure mode. Nobody reconciled these logs for 4 days. "The Combine has been operating for 10,000 years, the Romani woman translated from Hattori's next words. "Reconciliation happens on audit cycles, quarterly, perhaps annual. The logs will reconcile eventually, but not yet. But not yet." The tracker spoke from the floor. Her words were few. She used the Combine vocabulary sparingly, filling the gaps with gesture, but her meaning was precise. She pointed at the left line, then at the magistrate's recovery team tracking data, visible as a moving dot on the navigation display's periphery. 3 days out, closing, the recovery team follows the magistrate's chain, the Romani woman translated. If the magistrate's log were to show a resolution, the ship reclaimed, the situation handled, the recovery team would be stood down. The bridge was very quiet. Hattori let the silence work. He had learned in the courts of the Sengoku period that the space after a statement was where understanding lived. You did not fill it, you did not rush it, you let it do the work that words could not. The modern woman filled it, because the modern woman filled silences the way water filled low ground, irresistibly and with total structural awareness. The codes will flag location. Any Combine system that processes a captain's authorization from the ship will check where the ship is, and we're not where we're supposed to be. Hattori looked at her. She had seen the flaw in the plan before he had presented the plan. This was precisely why he had requested her presence. "Yes," the Romani woman translated, one word. The modern woman's eyes narrowed. She understood what the one-word answer meant. He had already known. He had been waiting for her to find it. "So the captain has to send it himself," she said. "From this bridge, with valid codes, from a location that matches the ship's registered heading. For the Dwath, which it won't," the Romani woman added, not translating now, but contributing. "We've been off the registered heading since Pakla set the new course." Hattori touched the diagram again. The single bridge at the top, the one point where the two chains connected. In that the HFY man, the Roman looked back. His jaw worked once, the muscles tightening and releasing in the way Hattori had learned to read, as the Roman's equivalent of a drawn breath before a decision. Then he spoke, 2 words in his language, flat and military and entirely without ceremony. The Romani woman translated, "Ask him." The captain occupied the station he had occupied since the bridge was taken, the communications console at the port side of the bridge, angled away from the navigation display. He had not been restrained. He had not been locked in a cell. There had been a brief discussion about this on the second day, which Hattori had followed through gesture and the Romani woman's summaries. The Roman had argued that a restrained prisoner was a liability requiring guards, while an unrestrained cooperator was a resource requiring observation. The tracker had pointed out that the captain had nowhere to go. The modern woman had disabled his remote access to any system that could summon help. The result was a man sitting in a console that could do nothing, in a room controlled by people he had once classified as cargo, on a ship that was no longer his in any way that mattered. He had been cooperating, without enthusiasm. Enthusiasm was not in the captain's register, but consistently, he answered the modern woman's technical questions about ship systems through the Romani woman's translation with the methodical thoroughness of a man completing a debrief. He ate the same nutrient slabs the crew ate. He slept in the same gravity standard increments he had always slept in. He was, as far as Hattori could determine, a bureaucrat whose institution had collapsed around him and who was maintaining his internal procedures because the alternative was formlessness. Hattori understood this. He had seen it in defeated retainers who, stripped of their lord and their purpose, continued to maintain the rituals of service because the rituals were all they had left. The captain was not dangerous. He was lost. Hattori approached him. The Romani woman came with him, and behind her the Roman, not leading but present. The modern woman stayed at her console. The tracker stayed on the floor. The audience was deliberate. This was not an interrogation. Alles wird a negotiation, and negotiations had witnesses. The captain looked up, his features broad, flat, the muted gray-green of combine standard biology arranged themselves into neutral acknowledgement. Administrative attention. Hattori spoke. The Romani woman translated. The words passed through her with the care she brought to moments that mattered. We would identify a discrepancy in your ship's administrative logs. 2 records that contradict each other, one in Freight Command, one in the Slaver Court. The recovery team currently approaching is operating on the Freight Command record. We need you to resolve that record. The captain listened. His eyes moved from the Romani woman to Hattori and back. He understood the translation. The Romani woman's combined vocabulary was sufficient for administrative language, and administrative language was all the captain spoke. Then the captain spoke. His voice was flat, procedural, and precise. The Romani woman translated with equal precision. If I do this, the magistrate's chain will eventually reconcile with the court's chain. When they do, both records will be anomalous. I will be in the anomaly. Hey, padre. The captain looked at the communication device on his station. His hands rested on his thighs. They did not move toward the device. I am already in the anomaly. Another pause. Longer. Hattori held still. The Roman held still. The Romani woman held still. The bridge held still. What exactly am I protecting? The honest question of a man who had realized that the framework he had built his career inside no longer existed, and that compliance and rebellion had become, for him, the same administrative category, decisions made in the absence of a valid superior. Hattori did not answer. He had learned across a lifetime of clan politics that the most powerful answer to a man in this position was no answer. Let him arrive at his own conclusion. Let him own the decision. A man who is argued into surrender will resent it. A man who reasons his way there will commit. The captain looked at the communication device for a long time. Then his hand moved. He touched the console, entered a sequence, his authorization codes. Hattori recognized the input pattern from the administrative logs. The console lit with the amber glow of an active transmission channel. The captain spoke into it, a string of combined administrative language, flat, procedural, indistinguishable from any of the thousands of routine communications he had fouled over a 47-run career. He reported the ship reclaimed. He reported the situation resolved. He used the passive voice because the Combine always used the passive voice. The asset has been returned to operational status. The recovery action is no longer required. The manifest discrepancy has been addressed through standard reconciliation procedures. The transmission went, the console dimmed. The captain removed his hand. He did not look at Hattori or the Roman or the Romani woman. He looked at the dead console, and his face held an expression that Hattori filed with the care of a man who collected such expressions, the face of someone who had outlived the category his decisions used to belong to. According to see a recognition not to bow. He returned to the navigation display. The others were already there. The modern woman had been tracking the recovery team's position, and the tracker had risen from the floor to stand beside her. They watched. The recovery team's icon on the display, a small blue marker moving along an intercept heading, continued on its course for 11 minutes. Hattori counted, the Romani woman counted. The modern woman watched the telemetry data streaming beside the icon and narrated in a low voice, speed constant, heading constant, formation unchanged. Then the icon shifted, not dramatically, A gradual course change, the kind of adjustment that looked on a display like a current shifting. The recovery team's heading tilted away from the Arveth's projected position, degree by degree, until it was no longer an intercept course. They're turning, the modern woman said. The bridge did not celebrate. The bridge had no word for celebration in any of the 6 languages present. What happened was smaller and more significant. 5 people and 1 former captor exhaled at the same time. The quiet lasted 4 seconds. We have perhaps 4 days before someone reconciles the logs, Hattori said through the Romani woman. He kept his voice level, the voice of a strategist presenting a timeline. Possibly 5. Sawa Tracker was already at the navigation display. She had been studying it for 4 days, longer than anyone, more patiently than anyone, with the attention of a woman who read landscapes the way others read books. Her hand came up, 1 finger extended. She wished a sign on the display, a boundary, not a heading, a curved line arcing across the stellar map, marking the edge of the region she had identified days ago, the cluster of 40-odd stars the Combine had marked and then avoided. The line passed through their projected course approximately 4.5 days ahead. We will be past the boundary by then, the tracker said. The modern woman looked at the line, looked at the tracker, looked at the line again. What boundary? She asked. The tracker's finger held steady on the display. The light of the avoided cluster played across her hand, amber and cold blue, the colors of cataloged systems and uncatalogued darkness. He did not look at the modern woman. She looked at what lay beyond the line. Here, the tracker said, the Combine doesn't go past this. A pause. Her finger did not move. I don't know why, but they don't. The line glowed on the display. Bandaim, the stars were uncharted. The Arvid flew on.